today, in this particular afternoon session, we just want to recap the issues that came out this morning in terms of, from the farmers' perspective, issues that will affect their ability to continuously produce food for us to eat, to keep us secure in terms of nutrition. How are we going to balance making money out of food production with keeping our parrots safe and healthy, because the parrots are protected? That is one issue. We're going to ask certain gentlemen at the table to talk about permanent agriculture, what we call permaculture. He will talk to you more about it. Kian is going to talk to us about, from an extension and agriculture perspective, the issues with availability and stability. Everybody knows that Dominica is no stranger to hurricanes, tropical storms, etc. And that is a critical aspect of stability of food supplies. And Lyndon John is a forester. He will speak to you about the importance of forest.
Yeah, all right, let's stay down here. Okay, so there's nothing really left for me to do. I can sit down now because Diane has introduced all of you to each other and to us, to me, and you know who we are as well. So given that fact, plus the fact that it's now 3 o'clock, and we only have a contracted version, a shortened version of what this was supposed to be. We had 2 moderators originally, Yolan and Agard Simmons, and I am not she. My name is Chester. And so we're going to move right into it. And as Dan said, really this is about you, this is about your contribution. We're talking availability and stability, 2 very important components of this whole plan.
Looking at food security from a forestry context, I would sum it up as forest resources underpins, or basically secures, agriculture. And why would I say that? Basically from the standpoint, Dominica just had the experience of Ophelia. St. Lucia has just come through the experience of Hurricane Thomas last year. And I can tell you, if it were not for the forest resources on our very rugged hillsides and slopes, we would have an utter disaster. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, loss of lives. In the case of St. Lucia, more than 13 people died with Hurricane Thomas. Forested hillsides came down. It's just one of those things. So the forest resources has a role to play in terms of providing water, slope stabilization, and the whole business of that slow release of discharge of water into our streams and rivers. So that's one area. I would also want to introduce the idea that, as far as I'm concerned, in the Caribbean, we are yet to be fully innovative with our forest resources when it comes to food and basically food security. When you think about it, in our visits to the farms today, practically all of the crops and the wildlife, the livestock was introduced to this region. You think about pigs, you think about cows, you think about goats, you think about all of these animals. These were introduced to our region. When you try to look at it on the other way, how many of our wild species have we been able to bring into a domestic or cultivated environment? Very few. This region has brought, at least when you talk about Latin America and the Caribbean, you have corn, you have potatoes, which the Irish were very happy to have from this part of the world to save theirs. And that's about it, right? So there's more that we can do. I know, for instance, in St. Lucia, we have a relative of the passion fruit called pomme de liane. You all probably know pomme de liane from Dominica and everything else. Why is it that nobody's grafted this thing onto the passion fruit stock? This would make an excellent table fruit. Everybody considers this thing to be wild fruit. It is very sweet. It would make good ice cream. It can be very much commercialized. The problem is innovation in this region and to reverse the process. I know the chickens and the pigs and the cows came to us lock, stock and barrel. The diseases, how to fight them, how to rear them, at what age you cull, what age you do everything. The research and development is a cost that we would have to do for our own species. Whether it's iguanas, whether it's agouti, whether it's pangolin, whether it's balata fruit, right? We have palms and all these other fruits from the forest. We could be looking at sustainable harvesting for those. So that's our biodiversity protecting and doing something about food security, which is not a matter of import dependence. So there's some area that the forest is still yet to be utilized in that regard. Climate change is literally at our doorsteps. We only can expect more hurricanes, more intensive hurricanes. So it's an increase in the frequency of the hurricanes, of occurrence, and an increase in the intensity. So we actually get to a stage where our forests in this region are being hit so hard and so often that they are now terming them as storm climax forests, which means that they never mature to the level that you see the Chattagny and the Gommier that you saw, these big trees on the estate today that some people thought were, bay leaf. No, that's Gommier that you're looking at there. These would be the dominant trees, but if they keep consistently getting struck by hurricanes, then they just can't stand it. And so there's more and more gaps in the forest, and so you have more and more pioneer species, which are short-lived and not as robust as the trees that make it to a fully mature tropical climax forest. So these are some of the elements that we need to consider when we're looking at forests, the value and potential value to agriculture, and also the role they play in providing a sustainable water resource, soil control, soil management, soil erosion management, all of these aspects that we have to factor in when we come into this sector. When you look at the impact that's happening, typically ecosystem valuation is not factored into our planning in the region. So the forests are basically considered a free good. No value. When the prime ministers and the various ministers given their budget address, you hardly have them speak about the money for the forests. It's nothing about that. But for some reason, water only has value the minute it is captured by the WASCO, whatever you want to call the water authority in our respective countries. The minute it gets into their catchment and is sent into the pipes, that's when it's got a value. But that cannot be. If you're not invested in the production of water, and I mean it from the hills, why should it have the value when it gets into the pipe? It started long before the dam. And so there's a need to invest in our forest resources and protect that water resources. In our region, we rely a lot on our overland flow, and so that's where we're coming from. We have to pay more in the interest of protecting the resources up front. Otherwise, the minute the hurricanes hit, we lose access to those resources. We miss water, we miss your food, things get desperate. People have to talk about importing water. Like last year, that's what St. Lucia was looking at from the drought. We are looking at potentially importing water from Dominica. It can get very severe. So basically, that's my contribution to this stage.
At this point, I'd like to invite any comments that want to rush out of you. Anything that anybody wants to say in response to that. Eric from St. Kitts Nevis?
Yes. I was just wondering, Lyndon, what are the main challenges affecting forests in the region? Because I know you said that the governments are not doing anything with regard to funding, with regard to public conservation. So what would you say are the main challenges for our forests in the region?
In the 80s, I would definitely say because of the emphasis on export of bananas, that was a challenge back then. Today we're seeing a shift, and what's going on is that zone, that almost coastal zone, which I would call the tropical dry forest in many states, many of the island areas are being covered, converted for purposes of residence, hotel and golf course development. Big time. It's a major problem in many areas. So we're seeing some secondary forests recovering in areas that were under banana cultivation. That's good. But at the same time, we're seeing a shift to other areas, and that's where, you have small islands, let's say again in the case of St. Lucia, where you have 11 to 14 golf courses planned for an island like that. That's unsustainable, right? So there are definitely new challenges for forest resources that we have to consider in our planning.
Okay, my question is on climate change. You mentioned something about the effects of climate change on the forests in this region. I just want to find out what sort of deal are you looking for post Kyoto Protocol, if you're going to be going to the talks that will be happening in South Africa, and what sort of arrangement would work for this region?
At the moment, as far as I'm aware, CARICOM is supporting the RED Plus arrangement. However, some of the islands seem to have some different views on that, because RED Plus appears to be a mitigative stance for most of the countries, particularly those that are trying to avoid the obligations under the Kyoto Protocol. So, but for us, if we are getting the investments in promoting sustainable forests, and basically looking at carbon sequestration and getting funds to support that in our region, this would really benefit, for instance, the largest states in the Caribbean, in the CARICOM region, which would be Suriname, Belize, Guyana. These are the first beneficiaries, I would say, from the RED Plus arrangement. But collectively, maybe the OECS could form an alliance to take advantage of that. But the problem is that it's being negotiated in the context of mitigation and not adaptation. And that is where there's a difference in terms of the Caribbean islands and forestry.
Thank you for making that last statement. I just want to share that for Africa, it's only recently that we have realized this problem of having the different departments fighting for different things. In July, our ministers of agriculture for the first time met with ministers of environment, ministers of water, and they've decided they want to have one stand when they go to Durban. So I would really encourage it for this region as well.
Okay, let's move along to our next panelist, Keon Stevenson, Ministry of Agriculture from St. Lucia. Sorry, Dominica.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Going straight into the matter, we're talking about stability and availability, food and nutrition, stability and availability. On a Ministry of Agriculture standpoint, I'll more like to, I jotted down a few points. I'll more like to look at the type of crops when we talk about stability and availability, the type of crops we grow, the cropping systems. I'll expand on that. In talking about stability and availability, the type of crop and our cropping system will play a lot on our stability, food stability and availability. For example, Dominica, an island prone to hurricanes, and so traditionally we grow bananas. We know bananas may be a vulnerable crop in terms of hurricanes, winds, and so. In the past, how we survived was through wind crop and insurance and those kind of things, but how stable is that crop and how available it is when we talk about nutrition, food security, availability. So that's just an example, not pounding on bananas, but as an example, right? Our cropping systems as well would play an important part. Whether we practice conventional farming, whether we practice that conventional farming in the correct ways is one thing. whether we adopt other farming systems in terms of permaculture, which we will expand on later, organic agricultural systems, IPM, integrated crop management, different systems, different cropping systems will relate or affect the availability and the stability of our food. It will also affect the nutrition and security of our food. So the types of crops, the cropping systems that we promote as a ministry is very important. And getting farmers and stakeholders to understand those things are also important. When we talk about that, we also, so I mentioned about permaculture, organic agriculture, agroforestry or silviculture. Even now we can look, when we talk about ecotourism, agrotourism, all this can play a part in sustainability, availability and stability, right? Because we're not only talking about growing food and having the food available to us, but we're also talking about improved livelihoods, right? Because there's not everything that we may be able to grow and have for ourselves. Some of it may have to be imported, some of it so. We're still talking about livelihoods of individuals as well. In these cropping systems, we can even expand on that further when we talk about prevention of land degradation and sustainability, which I mentioned earlier. So we can also talk about that. I'm glad you brought up the point about climate change, because this leads us to even the challenge of climate change, right? So we have many challenges right now: climate change, the economic situation, the global economic situation, and all of this. So this brings us to methods of adaptation and mitigation. How do we as people adapt our practices, adapt our lifestyles, adapt the crops we grow, and how to be resilient or to stand up against the challenges, right? Mitigation. I remember one farmer telling me that when he became a banana farmer, I mean, banana is our challenge, so it goes way back. So many of our examples go to bananas. But one banana farmer, I remember telling me, going back to the hurricane situation, he said when he got his first loss from bananas in hurricanes, he decided, as he made a personal choice, that he had to grow a crop more suitable. He couldn't afford having his crop lost every year from hurricanes and whatnot. So he chose pineapples. Right? He chose pineapples. He became a pineapple farmer. Why? Because pineapples are adapted to hurricanes. They're not easily toppled. They're adapted to drought. They're a resilient crop. They're a resilient crop. Right? So in terms of adaptation, we have to look at those kind of things. Mitigation, in terms like we may say, well, Dominica is blessed with rainfall, whatnot, but hey, 2009, 2010, we were affected by serious droughts. Probably right now we have to think of mitigation factors like irrigation on our farms, right? Irrigation, those mitigation factors will also have our production cycles more stable. We'll have food more available to us year-round, right? And consistently. So we have to look at those kind of things. That brings in to place policy and programs, right? To have those kind of practices and to bring those things across to the people, we have to put in place correct policies. Right, government and other stakeholders have to have correct policies, have to have correct plans with these things in mind. Policies and plans targeted to that type of technology and that type of development. No longer can we go the old way of thinking, conventional way, as agriculture is just production and profit driven. It's much more than that. We have a lot of external costs and external things attached to agriculture that we don't really put a price on, and if we have to put a price on it, we look at something else. So policies, programs. When we talk about policies, programs, our research and development, right? I remember the minister saying yesterday in the Farmers Forum, where is our research and development? Can we depend on research and development from outside countries, from the developed world? Or do we as developing countries have to have our own research and development targeted for our own conditions and our own situations? Right? So our research and development have to be relevant to our conditions and to our plights. Right? The linkages between research and development, the linkages between different organizations, different ministries, agriculture, health, environment, solid waste management. We need linkages with those things to have to go in. and local versus imports. What can we do ourselves and what do we have to get from the outside, whether it be regionally or internationally. And with that, just one closing comment before I'm a science student. The basic thing in physics, when you learn physics, the first formula they teach you is work equals force times distance. Right? So, which one is more work? Me lifting up this chair here with my pinky or me pushing against the wall? Which one is more work? Pushing against the wall? No. But I apply force to that, but I get nowhere. No distance is gone. Right? Energy spent. Force is spent. We're tired at the end of the day, but we get nowhere. So no work is done. I may pick up this chair with my little pinky finger. Work is done. Distance is moved. Force spent, distance moved. Work is done. Right? So sometimes the hard thing is not always work and it's not always success. Sometimes it's just the little things. Right?
Thank you, Kian.
Three quick things, if I can remember. One, I know that we, from a forestry perspective, the importance of watersheds, but given the size of our islands and the intricate interplay between what's happening not only in the forest but in the farm and in the field and in the plain and in the sea, I think we need more and more to see our entire islands as watersheds. And the impact that the farmer with his chemicals will have on the fish and also even on the groundwater resources for countries that aren't blessed with mountains and great forests. I can think of one. The other thing I wanted to ask though was two things now. One, we all have the perspective of the farmer as the good guy, he's the man there feeding the nation. Or she, yes, indeed. But to what extent do they become black hats by the overuse of chemicals, particularly, not so much even pesticides, it seems, but fertilizers and high nitrate content of that in water that people end up drinking. I want to get the perspective of how you're dealing with farming, dealing with patrolling and policing that, particularly as it is in the forest watershed, and what policies can you think of? Nothing to do with forestry, nothing to do with agriculture, but actually work right now against everything that you are working towards and trying to achieve, both from the perspective of solution and
Okay, that's a very good question. In terms of policies and whatnot, well, that takes us back to the first point I made in terms of cropping systems, right? And the type of cropping systems we as a ministry promote to the farming public. Agriculture is one of the major contributors to climate change, land degradation and whatnot. But it's often through the bad practices, even not only bad practices by farmers, but even by bad practices that we as technicians promote to farmers, right? So it is this whole paradigm shift where we as technicians and farmers have to look to new innovations, new systems, new techniques, right? And that brings us back to what I talked about, the external cost. Long before we look at farming as strictly profit, increase yields, increase profits. We never took in the external cost. The degradation of the land, the pollution of the water system, the chemicals we use, the degradation of ourselves, right? If we carry out a survey, probably we see many of our aging farmers suffering from prostate cancers and different types of cancers.
In terms of the broad policy that I see affecting the agriculture environment, I would say the current European Union standards. In terms of fair trade, what we're seeing is that farmers are now having to pay more attention to more sustainable types of agriculture. You have to watch out. If you have rivers flowing through your land, you're supposed to have trees, on the river banks. Reduction in the use of pesticides, agrochemicals, etc. So some farmers to meet the fair trade standards and gain the benefits of the social incentive, they're starting to move in that direction. So I would say in terms of an agricultural influence, that's one.
Positive?
A positive. I'd say positive. In terms of the planning, and you talk about the watershed, I would suggest that watersheds be the basis for development planning, and not this thing about the sector. However, this is taking place in a land context, a land tenure context, which is one based on family lands for much of the islands, as Dominica, St. Lucia, etc. And so you find, the lands are constantly being divided, and so how do we get around to dealing with family land issues, and do we want to alter that? Because there's some benefits attached to that type of land tenure, right? But that's exactly, so the business of managing lands and what can happen where on the basis of a watershed context, I would promote that for planning.
Our next panelist is Earl Rahman Norona. He was born and raised in Kenya. He also lived in Canada and now makes Trinidad his home. Earl teaches and practices permaculture and is the owner of Wasamaki, which I'm told is a Swahili word, Wasamaki Ecosystems, a 30-acre formerly citrus estate undergoing a permaculture restoration while producing cut flowers, tropical fish, and indigenous food crops. Earl's farm has won agricultural entrepreneur awards for forestry, agriculture, and horticulture. Earl has a BSc in applied biochemistry and an MSc in zoology, as well as training in intensive aquaculture, dendrology, and tropical landscaping. He's completed 2 permaculture design courses in Belize and Trinidad and has been used as a permaculture expert by various organizations throughout the Caribbean, including Jamaica, Suriname, Dominica, and Puerto Rico. Earl is also an accomplished adventure racer and ultra marathoner. Earl Norona.
Well, before I start, can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, good. Well, the reason I was brought to Dominica is part of connecting all the dots together, and that is part of what we do in permaculture. So, before I even go any further, how many of you all have heard about, or haven't heard about permaculture before? You've never heard about permaculture? Have people heard about permaculture before? No? Alright, well, permaculture started in Australia maybe about 40 years ago. Alright, and it came about because the person that brought up this topic, his name was Bill Mollison, he realized that everything that we do in agriculture these days is connected to oil. Alright? So that if you need to plow your land, use a tractor that runs on diesel. If you need to apply pesticides to your land, the pesticides come from oil. If you need to spray herbicides, the herbicides are oil-based. If you need to transport your crops a long distance, you have to pay for that transportation, which is all run on oil. And when oil was cheap at $15 a barrel, it was easy to do agriculture because it was cheap. Now that oil is reaching 100, 120, 140, some people are predicting it can go up to $300 by 2 years' time. What would that do to agriculture? Okay? Because there's 2 things it would do. The first thing it would do, because you would have to buy all those implements, is you would have to put up your price. Alright? And the price of food would go up. And the price of food would go up and everyone would complain. And everyone would look at other ways of bringing in food. So people that are doing food on a bigger scale somewhere else in the world would start taking over what farmers are doing locally. Alright? So what he decided to do is that he said is that we should be practicing agriculture in a way that does not use oil. Alright? So that it doesn't matter what the price of oil is doing outside of Dominica, or outside of Trinidad, or outside of St. Lucia. Because if none of what we're using involves oil, the price of food that we want to charge for anything would not change. right? And the whole idea is if we import, as people have said, $4 billion worth of food into the Caribbean every year, all of that has to be transported over here. And as soon as the price of oil goes up, the price of transport goes up, and the price of food goes up. All right. So we are very very connected to oil right now, and we have to find ways of slowly weaning ourselves off it. So permaculture came up with this. Bill Mollison came up with this idea of permaculture, which is about creating sustainable systems, so that instead of a farmer having to go out and buy his seed, buy his fertilizer, buy his chemicals, he would start producing things on his site. All right? So that slowly over time, you would eliminate how much fertilizer you're bringing in, you would eliminate how much pesticides you have to spray. And as your system within your farm builds up, it becomes more sustainable. As the insects on your farm start becoming more different, as the biodiversity increases on your farm, it actually has benefits on your crops. All right? Because when you spray pesticides, the pesticides don't only kill the pest, they kill the things in nature that are eating the pest as well. And there are always less of those than there are pests. So that as you keep spraying, you kill out all the things that would naturally eat your pests. So that if you spray and you kill lizards, you had no intention of killing the lizards, you were killing something else. The lizards would take a year before they would come back, but the other pests that you killed, there's a few left, and those would come back within 2 or 3 weeks. But now there's nothing there that will keep them under control. Alright, so the whole idea of permaculture was creating a system that would start providing all of these benefits to the farmer, so that the farmer is no longer in debt to everything else that is out there. So that if you don't have to take in money, you don't have to go to the bank to borrow money to buy your seed, to buy your fertilizer, to buy your pesticides. You're producing everything by yourself. You suddenly become more empowered. All right, and that was the idea behind permaculture. Now, did each of you all get one of these? Yes. All right, so on page, I won't go through it page by page, but I will just go over it very quickly. Right, on page 22. All right. There's a little bit of what I talked about permaculture. And permaculture is based on three ethics. All right? Most agricultural systems are just based on profit. Permaculture is actually based on 3 ethics. One is that you care for the earth, you care for the people, and you care for the future. All right? And those are very nice ethics that you can have out there, but how do we go around applying them? And the way that we go around applying them in a way that we can all use is by something called these 13 principles that are outlined over here. And that is just about how you would lay out things. Alright? So in permaculture, we're not teaching you a new way of doing agriculture. We're teaching you a new way of thinking. So that we're teaching you about how nutrients flow within your farm. So if it's raining on your farm, and a good way of doing this is if it rains heavy on your farm, and you go down to where all the water is draining from your farm, and it is clear, you're doing a good job. If it's clear and it's flowing slowly. If it's full of soil, and it's rushing off your farm, that means it's taking all the nutrients off your farm very quickly, that you then have to go out and buy to replace. Alright, and in permaculture what we do is over a 10-day period when we teach a permaculture course, we take in farmers or we take in anyone that's interested in permaculture, and we teach them over the 10 days how they can slow down the water on their farm so that it's not taking all the nutrients of it, how you can plant things on your farm that are actually adding nutrients back into your soil. So like the mortel tree that, do you all have that here? The mortel? It was traditionally grown as a shade plant in cocoa. And people thought it was just for shade. But it not only does that, it takes nitrogen from the air and it puts it back into the soil. So that instead of you buying urea, the plant is actually doing it for you. all right, and it holds water in the soil so that during times of drought, there is still water left in the soil. So that's why a lot of the old cocoa farms had a lot of mortar on their land that people thought was just for shade. So when we've shifted to this new cocoa production where we cut down all the mortar trees, we plant cocoa right next to each other, and a dry season comes, it kills everything because we don't have those benefits. All right? So that's just an example of how we can go around doing things that would benefit our site. So we talked about the topic that we were dealing with was basically availability and stability. Alright, so if you're trying to provide food for yourselves everywhere, the idea is you should be planting things that will provide you for food throughout the year. If you plant a crop and you're only going to get food in 9 months' time, you're doing something wrong. You should be planting food for yourself that you should be able to harvest from every day. Alright, and that is the idea that around your house in permaculture, you're providing food for you and your family every day. So that you plant a very diverse set of things that you can always harvest. And then further out, you're planting things that you will have for sale. And further out, you're planting things that will take care of the long term. And even further from that, you're planting things that will take care of the wildlife. And that is all different things that we take into account in permaculture. Alright? There's a lot that I can talk about, because when we teach permaculture, I can talk for 10 days. So, these are just some of the very few things that I can talk to you about. The soil is the most important thing that you should always be conserving on your soil, on your farm. As soon as you have nutritious soil, you have nutritious food. Once your soil is poor, all your nutrients are gone, and even though you're producing food on it, they may not have all the nutrients in it. Right? And that is things that you need to think about. Trees are very important. If we're dealing with climate change, if you plant a short crop that needs a certain type of climate, and the climate changes, you lose your whole crop. Right? If you have a permaculture system with a lot of diversity in it, one thing might die, but the other things are there to take care of what you have. So those are just some of the ideas that we talk about. And like I said, I can talk a long time, so it's best that I kind of close up here. And there is talk about maybe having a permaculture course in Dominica. And we could come and teach it at some point, and maybe we would involve some farmers and we teach them, and then they go out and teach other people again. And that is part of how we further permaculture. Alright, so that's me for now, and any questions, feel free to ask.
I have a question, three, for you first. I remember this Great West Indies batsman, Viv Richards. He wrote his book titled Beyond the Boundary. I think one of the biggest problems with, well, that's my assumption, biggest problem for our Caribbean government leaders and policymakers is they don't go beyond the boundary. So they have a certain mark in all the islands, and once it reaches there, they forget about the forest. So my question to you, how can we get these policymakers to think beyond the boundary? To Keon, I find you kind of sugar-coated the end statement when it was asked by Mr. Giddens, what is affecting you? I will tell you straight, as I have heard it myself. One minister said that Dominica is turning into a service industry instead of an agricultural, so they're moving from agriculture to service. So this is true for her. They think that tourism is the best thing for her. So my question is, and the question I have for you now is, what do we do now? Are you planning as a ministry to stay conventional? Because we have this problem, the tourism, trying to take over agriculture, and you have all this promotion of young people, young farmers. Are you ready to stay? Are you going to still continue with your conventional farming, which we have about, I think, most of our families are 85% still conventional? Or are you planning, because we will have to fight this tourism thing, are you planning as a ministry to enter into and to adopt another farming practice to counterattack that?
We have to speak in the language that politicians understand, and that's dollars and cents.
Votes.
Well, once you get the dollars and cents answered, the votes will come. The money is a thing that, once you can show it, because at the end of the day, if you can tie the value or the cost of disasters It's an upfront thing. If you invest in the forest, you invest in soil stabilization, you invest in sustainable land management, you reduce the cost of the disaster. Whether it's drought, whether it's road reconstruction, whether it's houses demolishing or whatever, but you're putting in sustainable land management measures, and therefore you're reducing the cost. At this point in time, what we need to do is tally up the cost of the drought from 2009-2010, the cost of Ophelia, the cost of Thomas, and any other thing, and put a bill to that. And then look at what happens when you have it in an area that's well protected.
I have two questions. First to the gentleman from Dominica. And I think what this young man just said strengthened what I'm going to ask, because we visited the syndicate this morning, and I've been to Dominica several times, and I always notice that when we visit farmers, it's always senior farmers. I can't recall visiting young farmers or middle-aged farmers. And Dominica has always had the tradition of being the breadbasket of the region. I mean, people from my country look forward to the boat coming every Tuesday, you know? So I am wondering, what is the situation regarding young people moving into agriculture? Is there a progression plan? What is the situation with the agriculture department encouraging young persons to move into agriculture? What is the situation with the schools regarding agriculture? We just heard that your Minister of Agriculture said that it's moving to a service industry. So unless maybe he's not interested in young people going into agriculture, I was just wondering what the situation is. And then to Mr. Permaculture, I was just wondering, what is the real focus for permaculture? Is it really for sustainability, or is it really for, as we are discussing this week, nutrition and food security?
The question of youth in agriculture, I could answer that question very simply in one word: look at me. Excuse me? But I'm involved in agriculture, and I am a farmer. But yes, but answering that more elaborately, we do have agriculture being taught at the primary schools. We do have agriculture being taught at the secondary schools. We do have an agricultural program at our state college, right? We do have, I think there are young students here right now that are involved in agriculture, the COLS program. So we do have some programs. We have NAIA, National Association of Youth in Agriculture. So we do have some movements of youth in agriculture. However, we not sugarcoating it, as my brother said, but as the slogan said in the Farmers Forum yesterday, and the Director of Agriculture put it, these are the things we are doing, but what else can we do? And we do recognize that there still is a lot more to be done, but it's a process, right? And one of the farmers again at the forum again talked about and it's not just a Dominica problem, it's a regional problem, it's an international problem. How do we attract youth in agriculture? And I think I will lend my brother's statements. When you show the youth the money, you will attract them. Yeah?
What percentage of the farmers are young?
No, we have an aging percentage of farmers. I mean, it is statistically shown that our farmer age percentage of our farmers are aging percentage. I mean.
Eric, your question again, just remind me.
I was asking whether the permaculture is really for sustainability or is it more for nutrition and food safety?
Permaculture deals with both, because you are trying to produce food that is nutritious in a sustainable way, so that basically all the foods that you are producing, permaculture does not have to be chemical free, all right? It's a way of transitioning from a chemical system to an organic system by eliminating a lot of your external inputs. So when I started my farm 13 years ago, I was using Roundup, I was using Gramoxone, I was using a lot of the chemicals out there. But as of 2 years ago, I have not used any chemicals on my land. And that's because I've slowly transitioned out of it. And that is by allowing certain areas to develop and letting other areas go wild, so that they would produce some of the predators that would keep down a lot of the other insects. So going back to your food security, issues. Permaculture is very much about providing people with food, and it's providing people with food all the time, so that we are looking at growing things that can be produced without a lot of effort. So that around my house I surround myself with root crops, because root crops provide all my starters with very little work. I surround my house with a lot of tropical greens that people don't know about very much, that come from all over the tropics, that you plant shrubs and you eat all the leaves that come out of it, and they taste just like some of the greens that you would grow. But a lot of the greens that we grow in the tropics are really weeds that come out from the temperate areas. So that you are trying to grow a temperate crop in a tropical area, you're going to have problems. If you grow a tropical green crop in a tropical area, you would have a lot less problems. So I surround my food with those kind of things. I use a lot of palm trees, because palm trees will pick up a lot of the nutrients that are in very low quantities in your soil, put it in your leaves, and when you use those leaves as mulch in your land, as compost, it returns a lot of nutrients to your site. So those are the types of things that we teach people, but the whole idea is that we're trying to provide food for humans in as small an area as possible, so that humans don't have to go further out and destroy more of the environment to provide food for themselves. All right? And that is the idea of small intensive systems close to your house that is providing a lot of food.
The problem is the land issue, the tenureship of land. And even if you have young person who want to go to agriculture, they will not own the land. And secondly, even if somebody may lease the land, the person is not to dictate to them what they can do. Sure. And then the third point, the financial institutions are not friendly toward the investment in agriculture. I just want to reinforce the point you made about the parish. That was one of the things when the parish started. If you're promoting the landowners, that they could use the opportunity with parish. View them, the same money you're losing from the crop deputation, the farmers could use that opportunity to get the tourists to come and look at the parrots. And actually, we have a farmer in Margaret that they're building a platform just for that, a viewing platform just for that. So there are opportunities. Everything they say, line, you get a line, make it okay?
Just hold the microphone close to your mouth.
With Elvi, that is my name.
Yes, we've met.
We met already, no? Thank you. I enjoyed the meal this afternoon, and I refuse to take the thing that we do not produce in my food. I refuse to take it. Anywhere I go, I refuse to use the thing that we don't produce. Now, the gentleman in the back has said about agriculture or export from pastoral area. In the 80s, let me go back to the 80s, we used to sold so many van loads of bananas, truckload of bananas in the same area where you pass today. Citrus, load tons of grapefruits, the shade, yam. Today you hardly see a farmer there. You see bush and abandoned land. You may see a future of oranges. But my friend here in the Ministry of Agriculture make mention about that people have been trained, or the training farmer, in other words, to go agro. To me, no plot in the island, we have no plot set anywhere in the island, not even a greenhouse, that the farmer or the young farmers can go and learn what the technicians are doing, so that they can not only go in school, because those people that taught people in school, I have more lessons to give to the students than those teachers. Because when they passing the subjects, a lot of them they're calling on me, a man that never attended school in my life, to assist them passing the subject in agriculture. Let the government prepare a place, a parcel of land, and show the young people how we can grow the beans, or the Irish potatoes, or the sweet potatoes, or the watermelon, in a way that we do not use the conventional way of agriculture. But let it come with the new ideology they're talking about. My Minister of Agriculture said, our markets are closing on us. He never tell us, give us any hint that is yesterday afternoon. I hint where we can salvage or how we can tackle the situation. So what we are hearing is doom and more doom to the farmer of this country and maybe by extension the region. Now, we are saying now, that gentleman said about his yard, maybe he have a big yard, so he can plant little thing around his yard. But while he may have a big yard, but he may have a job. But if farmer that do not have that kind of yard, and they do not have a job, what he has in mind to tell us, or people that do not have a job and a yard, so they can produce whatever he said to in his yard. No, my last point is, I have so many things to say, but my last point is the parrot situation. I witnessed Joseph Louis has spent tons of money through lawyers working to fight against the parrot situation. At one time, everybody said they may love the parrot. At one time, we told a forum like this one, go to the farm and remove don't go in the forest, go to the farm and remove 500 parrots. They said that is not an option. Since 1982, I have been suffering. I have cried. My emotions of American are the holy. And up to today, I have a personal plan, which I took some of you there. Or you see my situation. Nobody attended to me. So my question is, how long that can happen? How I can sustain myself without that? Excuse me. I have a wife. I have children. And I have 29 grandchildren. And I have 4 great-grandchildren. I cannot sell that piece of land. What the government or the Caribbean and all the technician and the expert that I hear this afternoon have to tell me with me about my plight and the devastation of my crop. Every day, more I plant, more I lose. Let me add something to that. At one time, I took chainsaw and I put down a whole field of the crop to bring it lower so that the parrot might not invade the place and destroy the parrots. I spend money on lawyers for the past freedom government. They don't even respond to the lawyer. That present government, I send lawyer paper for them for compensation, whatever. No responding. Now somebody said we have something else. No chance to do. There's a little plant at Dieu Blanc, which I sat down with Dr. Rhino and Mr. Durant in the facility you had syndicated in his office. And I told Mr. Rhino about my problem. He told Mr. Lee, I know your problem. What I want you to do for me, get some farmers that are interested and let them write their name and bring it to me. And then I will go to Florida. My company in Florida will put $50,000 US to purchase a machine. From that machine, I will go over to Florida to see what I can glean, what I can collect, what I can get. And then so he did. He brought 2 machines down here. Now I'm going to go too long. There are 3 long years. The first year, I provided citrus to crush, to try the machine, it is 100%. The second year, I brought down citrus again to try that machine. 100%. Today is the 3rd year. I said I am not part of it again. I wrote the government, I said, listen, I am in a position to run the factory myself alone. I have the fruits, go around the island, check where you can find the citrus area, check how many farmers have citrus, and then if you don't find, come by me, and give me a chance, let me run that little bit, that if other farmers have citrus that they want to sell to me, I will be able to buy it. No responding. So my question is, what a man like me, I am 79 years old age, I am about to die. How I am going to sustain myself for the remaining days of my life and my wife? Thank you very much.
Actually, while I was making that point, Lennox here pointed out that he's already experimented with it in St. Vincent, which is wonderful. The idea is that I've heard that also Belize and some of these places are moving in that direction of ice cream and things like that. The bigger point is research and development of indigenous crops and wild species. We have imported guava, we've imported pineapple, we've imported banana. But what is it that is in our forest that is yet to be explored and becomes an innovation, a novel idea that we can export as an agro-processed product and create a demand out there? So at the moment, that's where the limitation is. And yes, experimenting has begun in these places. Yes.
Now the minister.
I'm feeling humbled for being called a minister, but I'm very far from that, right? I'm just an employee of the Ministry of Agriculture. Thank you very much. But could you pose that question again?
Yeah, the question is, seeing that, as I said, it is, it sounds very interesting, and we could look into it. How soon can we get into that? Into what? Into the grafting and making it productive, and
No, but as the man said, these are ideas and innovative thoughts, right? So there's nothing wrong in farmers taking the initiative and doing those things, right? Because I can give you one example. I don't want to say, but I know one farmer, for example, that takes that propagates babawule. All of us know babawule, the wild yam, that yam that grows wild in the forest. And traditionally, we only go in the forest to harvest it for Christmas time and whatnot. And it grows there, nobody cultivates it or whatnot. Right? I know a farmer in Dominica growing babawule, propagating it, growing it, taking the babawule, the wild yam for those, right? Making it into a flour, not only making it into a flour, but also making it into a bread and also making it into cookies.
That's interesting.
All right then.
Yeah, but and also in St. Lucia, I know you're probably familiar with Balizier NDC. That's the broom. The demand for the leaves for those brooms was a real problem. And the broom makers are traditionally women. And they had to pay these guys to go deeper and deeper into the forest to get leaves. We started cultivating that. And we have about 14 farmers now growing latania on their land. Also, Morbi is another one that we're promoting cultivation on. So we're moving from wild extraction to a cultivated context. So the forest still have resources to promote.
Let me just make a very quick point. I'm going to be very, very quick because I talk a lot. I say politicians think generally in political generations and strategic thinkers think in real generations. And that is one of the problems we have in the Caribbean, that we do planning on too short term. It's always 5 years. And we don't look at doing things over a real generation. And that's why that could be one of the reasons we're not attracting young people into agriculture. I want to ask you a question with respect to agrotourism. This is a hype that is going around the Caribbean now. Everybody talking about agrotourism. I don't agree with it. For the simple reason that we are not talking about mitigating the risks of agro-terrorism. Which, if for instance you have a product and somebody wants to wipe it out, what is better for them to come to visit your farm and drop a few microorganisms which you can't really control? So we got to be very careful when we jump onto these things. Agro-tourism has to be properly thought out. When you go on, you can't go on to a farm, walk onto a farm in Europe to visit anything. You have to put on special stuff on your shoes, you have to put on special suits. And we cannot be too complacent. You might see your coconuts getting special sort of diseases and all kind of things because they want to wipe it out. We have to be careful.
I think that's a point.
Every perspective. Just to thank Chester, thank our panelists, we're always available. If you want to get any more information about what we've said here today, just contact Kian and he can get in touch with any of us. Yes, the Minister.